Welcome back to your favorite father-daughter combo here at Dad's Planning Politics. Today we have a lot to get through. Do you wanna lay out some of the topics?
We do. Hi, Freddie. Hi, everyone.
Okay.
We've got a lot to talk about today. First of all, we're going to look into all the tariff situation that's come to the fore over the weekend. We're going to look at some of the things that are happening in terms of the Australian economic situation, in terms of inflation easing, etc., and some of the terrible anti-Semitic attacks that have been happening in Australia recently. So they're the key sort of themes. But let's start, Freddie, with the tariff situation.
Okay, yeah, let's start with that. So, I mean, obviously, we all knew that Trump was going to do some crazy protectionist policies as soon as he got into government. So, we've all been waiting in anticipation of what he is going to deliver to the world economy, I would say. And so, the tariffs he was warning about, the ones he was going to put against Canada and Mexico for in punishment of the influxes of fentanyl and of people crossing the border, he was going to put 25% tariffs on both of these countries that border the US. So how has that had an effect so far on these countries, and what is their response
Well,
been?
it comes into place Tuesday US time, so tomorrow US time. It's Sunday night in the US, Monday in Australia as we speak. So very soon, in the next 48 hours, they come into place. So 25% on Canada, 25% on Mexico, and 10% on China. I haven't seen a response from China yet. There's been an immediate response from Canada, and Justin Trudeau did a very good interview, I think, for someone who's leaving politics very soon, and they're going to be choosing his successor. But he was speaking directly to the American people and saying this is going to mean price rises for you, and in a sense trying to burst the illusion that Trump has put forward that the only cost of this is to the exporters from other countries and not to the American public. So that's the fascinating thing. Likewise, Mexico has, both Canada and Mexico have said they're going to put 25% tariffs on all US exports to their countries. So tit for tat. And there's some talk that Trump will respond to their response and raise tariffs even more. So that will be interesting what happens over coming days.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting as well, going back to what Justin Trudeau said to the American public. I think there is this culture of intellectual superiority, right? Where people don't go into the practical details of what is going to be happening to your pocket and to the money you're going to be spending on a daily basis. And Justin Trudeau seems like he is trying to breach this disconnect that remains there, just saying practically, this is going to cost you. No one else is costing you anything. Simply the Trump administration is causing this for your people. So you need to think about this, understand that this is a direct cause of your actions and your voting patterns, and that's simply what's going to.
And I think it's going to have huge impact on the car industry, was what I was reading. Something like 400,000 cars are produced in Mexico every year by General Motors for export, obviously, to the US. And so this free trade agreement between Canada and Mexico and the US has been in place for almost 20 years now. So, supply chains are absolutely, by definition, international. You get parts from here and here, and I know this from my time at Cisco. There's supply chains around the world, and it's really complicated, right, to determine where everything comes from. And you source things based on comparative advantage of an economy. And so in terms of fresh food from Canada, in terms of fuels and all this sort of thing, and in terms of the car industry, they'll be some of the three key industries.
I mean, obviously, we saw during COVID how much the supply chains were affected, and that was simply the inhibitions of a pandemic. This is a country, one of the biggest economies in the world, deciding to completely pull out of the world economy. That's what it feels like. They're not, but the tariffs that they're putting on other countries are going to have a huge effect on every country involved. And
yes, agreed. It's a whole threat to the doctrine of free trade that's been the bastion of the world, really, for the last 40 years or so. And so it's going to be fascinating to see what the escalations are that occur. There's talk that there's going to be tariffs put on the EU. and they're a big player to put tariffs on, right? And so, of course, they will respond as well. And so the world economy traditionally has grown really well because of free trade and internationalism. Now, some people don't like that, but generally it's known that that's been a beneficial impact to the whole world order. And coming from a country like Australia, which is totally dependent on global trade and is a free and open economy, it could be incredibly damaging to places like Australia.
I mean, it's interesting to even think about that, right? The fact that the world runs off this idea of who has the greatest economy and who has the greatest GDP growth, et cetera, et cetera. America was one of the chief supporters of this, the chief supporters of measuring a country's success by its wealth. And the fact that now they are pushing back on that and causing such issues for every country across the world, and especially for their own economy, is rather interesting. You think, again, does Trump really know what he's doing? Is he trying to cause issues for other countries, or does he genuinely think that he's going to make America stronger in the long term? I don't know. I mean, I know that he phrased it to the American population saying, yes, they're going to feel a little pain. A little pain. A little pain is what Donald Trump will feel, you know, for his own payments that he has to do in everyday life. The American people are going to feel a huge amount of pain. Like it'll be difficult to even cope with. It's already difficult as it is the cost of living. It's going to be incredible the amounts of which it changes.
Your question, does he believe it? I think he does, and he's got incredibly good advisors. I'm not sure. The historic scenario is that everyone's philosophy has been, if everyone does well, everyone does better in the world, right? There's multiple winners. There's a win-win situation. But
I mean, that's why we have so many free trade agreements.
Exactly. But the way I think Trump thinks about it and his people are, America should win and others should lose.
Yeah.
Right? And so...
An American can only win if others lose.
If others lose. And it's a very strange new doctrine. Now, who's to know whether it will work or not?
I mean,
everything in economics tells me it won't work.
Everything I was going to say, I think that countless economists across the globe would say that it's not going to work definitively and would have advised the Trump administration to do the opposite of what they're doing. So, you know, we don't know what Trump's got up his sleeve, to be honest, so anything could happen.
If you're an economist, you're kind of excited because this is like a experiment with the global economy, right? To see what will happen.
That's true, but I think also if you're an economist who plays around even with the stock market or anything to do with that, then you're terrified. You know, there's one of two levels which people are feeling. I also know with those tariffs you were talking about against Europe, that he's decided will definitely go ahead, major tariffs against Europe. He tentatively has said there'll be tariffs against the UK as well. And he said that this is because they've been out of line as of recent. And obviously the Keir Starmer government isn't one who's going to agree with Donald Trump on everything he says, because Keir Starmer is, you know, famously part of a Labour government and has very different policy compared to the Trump administration. So it'll be interesting to see if Keir Starmer does anything to mend that relationship with the US, which is what Trump is hoping for. But I don't expect that anytime soon.
I heard they had a good phone call recently.
Really?
You know, Trump traditionally likes the UK because I think his grandmother came from Scotland and stuff, so he has some personal attachment, and he's always had a great respect for the royal family and such. So
I don't think the royal family had a great respect for him, though. We've laughed about the fact that Queen Elizabeth, I think, referred to him as that man and refused to meet him on a number of occasions because she didn't want to have anything to do with him when he was last president of the US and when she was still the monarch of the UK and the Commonwealth. So
that's true. There's lots of memes on that whole thing.
Yeah.
And lots of memes on that whole thing. And the other big news, which I didn't mention, was the whole rise of DeepSeek last week, the Chinese AI competitor, which had a huge impact on the stock market over a day or so, and that's somewhat recovered. And again, Trump's response to that was, which I thought was reasonable, that America needs to do better to make sure we compete effectively with these other competitors. So who knows whether it's true what the Chinese are saying, how it didn't take that much money vis-a-vis what the US is spending on that technology. And I hear there's lots of security flaws within that because it's one of the big issues with AI. You've got to make sure it's trustworthy and secure.
I mean, honestly, it's the main issue. It's the reason AI exists. It's the reason quantum computing is, they're developing that. It's to discover other states' security secrets, essentially, and to delve deeper.
One of the benefits.
One of the benefits, but I think one of the reasons it exists. Because why would governments have dedicated such large amounts of money and research development spending in general to developing such a thing unless it's at
because it can be
their own interest?
transformational for the society. For example,
It can be, but I'm not sure if countries have been so
the UK has,
focused
in
on
a
that
sense,
in
all this
recent-
money they need to save with the NHS because they're out of control. They're hoping that AI is going to help them save a great deal of money with running the NHS, just as an example.
Yeah,
It's really
that's true. That's
interesting.
true because it has a great hand to play in telehealth appointments and in diagnosis. Yes,
Totally. Yes, exactly.
across the board. So
Exactly.
we'll definitely see how that plays out in the next few years.
And Freddie, the other thing that there's a lot of people being fired in the US, and there's been a number of plane crashes.
There has been a number of plane crashes, and it was funny how funny is a loose word for it. How Trump that completely blamed all the plane crashes on the DEI, which is the Diversity and Inclusion,
Equity
and Inclusion portfolio, what would you say, department in the US government. Practices in the US. He blamed them, he blamed women, he blamed the previous administration, when actually Trump has had a hand in firing a lot of professionals in the aviation industry as of recently. So obviously when you start firing the big bosses at the top of the chain, yeah, it will have an effect.
Well, we don't know whether it had an effect. I mean, it's too early to tell. We don't know if it
had an effect, but there's been a large number of plane crashes in a few days. There's been a large number in 2025 in general, so we don't really know what that says about the administration.
I thought that the terrible thing was that, the military helicopter collided with a plane, and Trump really blamed the military helicopter for screwing up, and, all those service people died. And it's just a terrible precedent when a president assumes who's guilty and people who have died and servicemen and women have died. I was just thinking, what the hell do their families think, of these people who have died in service, and the president saying, they've screwed up and are responsible. It's pretty awful.
And you don't know people's reactions in crises like this. What about all the people who died in the plane crash? Will they now turn towards these servicemen and women and blame them for the fact that their family members have passed away? It's an incredibly dangerous precedent to start throwing the blame around when you have no idea what in actuality happened and when a thorough investigation has not been concluded as of yet. So.
And the other thing, Freddie, we should think about is the US has traditionally been the biggest donor to foreign aid in the world, and that's been all put on a 90-day freeze. So, in terms of global aid, this has been an incredible advantage for the US in terms of soft power, in terms of having influence around the world. And it's fascinating because it's chaotic, because, they have contracts with aid organizations around the world, and all these budgets have been frozen. And I'm just thinking this is a huge opportunity for China, particularly, and perhaps places like Russia to fill the void.
Yeah, I mean, I know that obviously that is a very important part of it to be taken into account, because in reality, that's what's happening. It's soft power. But I just have to think about the countless people who are now at risk of starvation. I mean, there's huge food banks that are supplying the majority of food across a ton of different areas in developing nations, whole NGOs that have completely fallen apart without this funding. And I don't think anyone in the Western world has made a commitment to step up. So yeah, that is what's going to happen. Probably China or Russia will have to be the one that fills that void. I can't see Russia doing it anytime soon.
They don't have the money, but China.
I can see China doing it. But this is when we need to also step back and take a look at the EU is probably not in the right situation to be putting a lot more aid for than it was. But what about Australia? And what about the UK? I think we really need to step up and take a bigger responsibility.
Countries like this.
Yeah, exactly. For the rest of the world, we it was getting unsustainable, the fact that we always relied on the US for this type of international support, and we really should have stepped up in the
You're quite
past.
right. I think you make a great point about wealthy middle powers. It's time for them to step up and take their place in the world.
Yeah,
So,
exactly. Stop shying away from the limelight. I mean, Australia, I think that we always act as if we're not one of the key players. We're simply there to support the US and the UK and everything they choose to do. But now that the US has become so volatile, what are we doing to help out?
it's a great point. I think the G20 should really step up, everyone in the G20, right?
Yeah.
Which includes places like Australia. So watch this space in this whole scenario. I even read that the retroviral anti-AIDS drugs in Africa, there's a freeze on those, and even though they have supply of the drugs, they've been told not to issue them anymore. I mean, it's just terrible things like this.
Yeah, horrific
So
things.
lots going on in the US for our US listeners and our global listeners interested in this, because every time people wake up, I think Alistair Campbell and one of my favorite podcasts, Rest is Politics UK, he said he often wakes up looking at his phone thinking about what Trump's done overnight, and I think that's how the world thinks.
I do think so. I also think one more thing to add along with that is that none of these budget freezes that the US has put through have had any advanced warning to all these NGOs, etc., and community groups. Whereas we look at the response of Canada to the 25% tariffs, and Justin Trudeau has issued a 21-day pause before the tariffs get put in place in order to allow Canadian businesses to find alternative suppliers, and alternative customers and areas to reach out to. So it's interesting to see when a government does take the population and people in general into consideration of how they're going to deal with that, and when a government does not and leaves, hundreds of thousands, millions of people in the lurch without any ulterior option. So
That's true.
yeah. But enough about the US, enough about Trump. It gets a bit too depressing. We are going to talk a bit about Australia and about the, recent months coming up to the election and what has happened with the inflation rate.
So inflation rate has dropped. So the government's very excited about that. Jim Chalmers, the Treasurer, I think it's the best news he's had. Tomorrow is the interest rate decision by the Reserve Bank, whether they cut interest rates in February or whether they wait till March. And there's talk that it's quite likely that rates might get cut tomorrow, if not in March. And so we think this has lots of implications for the election. Our theory is that if interest rates are cut tomorrow, Parliament is back. Albo may well announce the election within the next week or two. Otherwise, we think he'll wait till March until the Reserve Bank, because I think this could be instrumental in the decision for the election, because I think this whole talk of are you better off now, 4 years later, just as Trump used it in the US, is what Peter Dutton's saying.
Yeah, I mean, I know that traditionally it has had a great effect on our upcoming election, but there's been a lot of hit back by the shadow government and a lot of criticism saying they're celebrating a win when, the actual effects of
people are still suffering.
Inflation rate haven't come into play yet, and people are still suffering and people are still in pain. So should Jim Chalmers be celebrating as he is? And, I kind of think he should, right? It's saying a good thing for the economy going into the future, but that's the criticism from the Liberal Party camp at the moment. So we'll see how much it really has an effect. And as we're getting closer and closer to the possible election day, it's exciting to see how Australian voters be shifting from one side to the other. But a more depressing, more negative thing that's been happening recently in Australia is the massive rise of anti Semitic attacks over the past year. So do you want to...
Yeah, and there's been a lot in Sydney and around Australia, graffiti and firebombing of kindergartens and such. And recently, last week, a caravan full of explosives was discovered. Fortunately, they discovered it, and supposedly they had to list the Great Synagogue and a few other locations. So I think the Jewish community is feeling very threatened, and it's a terrible state of affairs that Australia really hasn't experienced for many, many years, this scenario. Unfortunately, it's been politicized. So Peter Dutton says that Anthony Albanese has not been strong enough and not taken this seriously enough, which is problematic, right? Because ideally, the best way of dealing with these things is in a bipartisan way. And I think, the government together with the police are now treating this utterly seriously. Um,
And I don't think they ever didn't treat it seriously. They always took it quite seriously from the get-go. And we think about the fact that I was looking into the statistics of anti-Semitic attacks in the past year and how they haven't just been increasing in Australia, but they've been increasing across the globe. The Anti-Defamation League in the US has recorded the highest number of anti-Semitic attacks since they started recording numbers, and similar figures have been seen in the UK as well. So, but in comparison, Australia has a very successful prevention rate of anti-Semitic attacks compared to these other countries. So we have, in comparison, been doing better, but obviously we need to just keep searching for that goal, because it can't continue like this. And, it's causing a lot of harm to different communities.
Well, I think
and a lot of fear.
we've always prided ourselves as a country of having a very successful multicultural model. So when things like this happens, it sort of threatens the whole basis of that scenario, because everyone, no matter what their beliefs or their preferences, should be able to live peacefully in Australia. And ideally, we don't like these conflicts from overseas being imported here. Australians have a very low tolerance for that. But as you can see, the world is such a global place. If you think about the influence of Trump and all of this, and the influence of, all the atrocities that have happened between Israel and Gaza,
Yeah,
etc., it's inevitable that some of it's going to come here. I think the challenge is how we respond to it as a society.
And the major part that the media and the internet plays in relaying this information across the world has been, like an unavoidable influence that it's had. And so events that would have happened in the past that we simply wouldn't have known about or emotionally connected as much as we have with Gaza, it's now obviously we're seeing a greater compassion towards events that are happening across the world, which are called trigger events, when in relation to attacks, cultural attacks of different natures. So the whole conflict happening in Gaza has been an extended trigger event that has happened for an extraordinarily long time, provoking like more and more conflict around the world and rising tensions. So people have been unable to express their sorrow and pain, no matter what side they're on. And so it culminates in these hideous, disgusting attacks. So we'll see what happens now that there's been a ceasefire, but obviously there's still a lot of reparation and, rebuilding to be done in Gaza and in that region in the world. So it will continue to have an effect across the international community.
The world is a very interesting and very dynamic and a little bit scary place at the moment.
I mean, it's always been scary, though.
But I was recounting with a friend the other day that I feel like for the last 30 years or so, politically, it's been rather stable. These institutions have been dominant: the United Nations, the World Health Organization, World Trade Organization. But all of this seems somewhat under threat at the moment.
I mean, at that point in time, the era that you grew up in was still in the throes of post-World War II.
And the Cold War.
And so the fear that people had of returning to a conflict-riddled world like that was so strong that I think it prohibited a lot of countries from engaging in more conflict. And now that fear is dissipating. So obviously it's becoming a very scary place. But we'll continue to come back here on our podcast and talk about it with you guys and answer any questions you have, any anxieties you have about conflict and foreign events over the world.
And we are now on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. And you'll notice we're doing video now. So we'd love you to tell all your friends and follow us and like us. And please come back with any questions or topics you'd love us to cover in future episodes.
Definitely. And just on top of that as well, I have made an Instagram account for us. So if you don't feel like watching a full podcast, feel free to just go to the Instagram account and watch a few reels that I've put up just to get a summary of events that's been happening around the world so you can keep up to date with everything you're going to discuss at your next dinner party. So thank you very much, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, Freddie. Bye.
Thanks, bye.